Rasial is RuneScape's newest boss and drops the best weapons in the entire game for the brand new combat style necromancy. In this video, I'll show you the loot of 1000 Rasial fights and I'll show you exactly how I did it.
Fight!
If you want more high quality RuneScape content, make sure to like and subscribe. Special thanks to the channel members who are a big reason why I can spend this much time in making the videos the best they can be. Rasial is the first necromancer in the history of Gielinor. He can be taken on by the players once they have reached level 95 necromancy and accumulated a total of 30,000 souls in their necromancy rituals. Defeating Rasial will allow you to snag some unique boss drops like the first Necromancer's armor set and the brand new tier 95 necromancy weapons. I will cover all the loot that I received in 1000 Rasial fights, but first I'll show you all the methods and tips that will help you if you want to get this boss collection log or if you are just looking for a new moneymaker. So first I will share you my exact method, and then after I will cover a bunch of different things that you can do differently to make the fight either easier or faster. So with that said, let's have a look at our loadout. For your armor set, you'll want to use the best DPS armor you have access to. Personally, I started doing this boss with a mix of tier 70 and tier 80 death dealer armor pieces. And slowly throughout the grind, I upgraded them to the tier 95 armor pieces that I got as drops from Rasial. When you are first learning this boss, and if you are having trouble getting your first kills, you can also swap out some of the armor pieces like the boots, gloves and helmet with the tank armor variants to give yourself some extra wiggle room for error, as Rasial can hit pretty hard and it might be tricky for some people to get down at first. But once you are getting your first kills, you'll want to swap out these pieces to the best DPS armor you have access to, as it will save you a ton of time and supplies by getting the fight over much quicker. The weapons were a similar story. I started with the standard tier 90 weapons to take on Rasial, and once I started getting the tier 95 weapons as drops from Rasial, I used those instead. If you have the tier 95s, make sure to also still bring the tier 90 main hand, as it is still really useful to switch to for its incredibly strong special attack. These are the perks I use on all my gear. They are pretty much the typical best in-slot perks for necromancy, but the one thing I should point out here is the Undead Slayer perk, as it works here and therefore is one of the most important perks to get here. For our amulet, we are wearing the Enchanted Salve amulet, and this is going to be your best option here by far, as it gives a huge 20% increase to both damage and accuracy for undead monsters, which includes Rasial. For our ring slot, we are using the Reaver's Ring, which is the best ring to use here. It does reduce your accuracy slightly, so if you aren't having 100% accuracy with your setup, then you might want to switch this out with another stat boosting ring. Our cape here is the Zuck cape as usual. You can use either the necromancy variant or the combined one. They will both boost your Death Skull's ability, which will be a huge increase to your damage, as a large chunk of the damage we do comes directly from this ability. In our pocket slot, we've got the Scripture of Jazz. Because Rasial is an undead monster and we've got a ton of damage boosts for that type of monster, we can do huge amounts of damage. And so it's not uncommon to see the Scripture of Jazz hit 30,000 damage whenever it procs, especially if you make sure that you use your strongest abilities while it is active. Next up we have a rune pouch. I mainly use this for a little bit of prayer bonus as we don't really have anything else to put in this slot, but optionally you can also fill this rune pouch with runes that you can use to cast the Disruption Shield ability, as this can really help you reduce some damage. Finally, that brings us to the auras. The main aura you will want to use here is the Majorat aura, as it is the best damage boosting aura you can get here. There are two other auras to consider, however, which are mainly used if you are learning the boss or you want some more relaxed kills here and there. Those being the Vampirism aura, which will help you upkeep your HP a bit by healing you, or the Aegis aura, which just gives you a flat damage reduction. Finally, it's worth pointing out which level I was when I was doing these kills. Personally, I started doing this boss fight almost right away when I could unlock it. So I pretty much did kills all the way from level 95 all the way up to level 118, which is what I am now. This is just to show you that you can do this boss at any level as soon as you unlock it, especially if you consider that my first kills were done with lower level weapons and armor than I have now. Let's have a look at our inventory now. The first thing that you'll see is the 4 different types of necromancy runes. Personally, I only use these for the split soul spell, but later I will talk about all the other necromancy spells and which ones can be useful as well if you want to use them. I just personally didn't want to do as much rune crafting, so I only used the split soul spell. Next up, we've got ourselves a Death Guard, which is the tier 90 weapon that we still use for the special attack. Then we've got our Luck of the Dwarves ring, which we switch to at the end of the kill to get a better chance of drops. We've got our Overload, of course, for damage boost. And then this potion here is a super adrenaline potion. We specifically use this adrenaline potion as it allows us to do a strategy that I will show you later. That strategy can also be done with an adrenaline renewal potion, but with that potion it is tick perfect and a bit more tricky. So I decided to use this super adrenaline potion just for consistency. Next up, we've got our Ancient Elven Ritual Shard and an Enhanced Excalibur. These two allow you to heal a bit and get a bit of prayer back. Then we've got a Super Restore Potion, which allows us to upkeep our prayer, of course. A bunch of Ectoplasm, which we are going to use 3 of every kill. Then we've got a Power Burst of Vitality. This is totally optional, but just allows you to give a little bit of more survivability in the last phase. We've got Vulnerability Bombs, which are of course a great damage increase. And then the rest of the inventory is Ceridome and Bruise and food for healing. I decided to use Rocktail as they allowed me to heal a lot in a single click. Technically, it's better to use Blubbers as they don't drain your adrenaline, but personally I don't like spam clicking that food throughout this entire kill. So I opted with the slightly less efficient and more abundant Rocktails. As far as familiars go, there were 2 separate familiars that I ended up using a lot. If you specifically want the fastest kills and don't care about anything else, then your only real option is the Blood Reaver. It synergizes especially well with the Ghost and its ability, allowing you to do a ton of extra damage with it. If you have them, using the scrolls for this familiar is also extremely good here, as it will heal you a lot. But even without scrolls, it is possible to do this boss with this familiar. You will just need to eat a lot more throughout the fight. Personally, I never use the scrolls, as I feel it's easier for me to upkeep the food than it is to upkeep the scrolls. The other familiar that I ended up using quite a lot for this grind is the Hellhound, which allows for safer and more relaxed kills, as it lets you reduce the damage you take by quite a bit. Although, if you have the Reaver with the scrolls, that might still be a better option for survivability. We camp Soul Split throughout this entire fight for the most part, only swapping to deflect necromancy in certain situations that I will talk about later when we talk through the kill. So that is the setup I used, so let's talk a little bit about potential extras that you can do to make the fight either easier or faster. The first 2 things that I didn't do but you can do for an easier time is Bone Shield, which is an incantation that allows you to use defensive abilities that would normally use a shield, but instead you will be using the necromancy runes. Personally, I didn't want to spend the runes, and so I didn't use it. but this can be particularly useful to use Reflect on the final phase to deal a bit of extra damage. Personally, I didn't think the rune cost was worth the slight damage increase, so I decided not to use it at all. Another incantation that is quite useful is the Darkness incantation, which will straight up allow you to avoid 10% of all incoming damage, which will of course greatly reduce your food used and greatly increase your survivability. Again, I just didn't really feel like using the runes. The same again goes for Life Transfer, which allows you to extend your necromancy conjures for quite a bit of extra time. This can be quite useful, especially if your kills are not so fast yet, but once you get some quicker kills, this really isn't as useful anymore. And then finally, for your first kills, if you're still learning and you are a lower level, then you might at some points have to deal with some of the minions. So if that is you, then Threads of Fate can be useful to quickly deal with all of them. If you're still having trouble, especially with the final phase, remember that you can always swap to the Ring of Death. This should really help you if you are having some trouble with the final phase, as it can give you a second chance if you take a hit that would otherwise kill you. Rasial has a ton of mechanics, many of which are actually quite similar to the player's own abilities. The first thing you should know is that Rasial will just be attacking you with normal auto attacks. Near his HP bar, however, you can see that he builds up Death Spark stacks. Once he reaches 6 stacks, his next attack will be a much bigger attack. There are many ways to deal with this, one of which is to use Disruption Shield. Others are to just eat up and make sure you have high HP. Alternatively, you can also use defensives if you are really desperate to reduce the damage a bit. You can also summon a bunch of undead like skeletons and zombies. Personally, I just ignore these, but if you have to, you can use Threads of Fate to take these out pretty quickly. Sometimes Rasial will spawn a wall of ghosts and deal about 4000 damage. Personally, most of the time I just eat up, especially if I have death skulls going. Otherwise, you can also run backwards through them or surge away to make sure you don't get damaged. Rasial will also slowly fill up his soul bar just like you can do, and once he reaches 5 soul stacks, he will also use Volley of Souls, which will deal a huge amount of damage. So if that happens to you, this is really the only part where you have to make sure that you're praying against necromancy damage. This should reduce the damage enough to survive, but you can also completely negate the damage by using Devotion. There's one final attack in the initial phases of the kill, which is the Spectral Scythe, where Rasial will dive towards you and use the Spectral Scythe on you. You can just use Freedom and run away to avoid this attack. And once you're getting quicker kills, you'll never see this attack anyway. Finally, you've got the last phase, where Rasial will just drop a ton of necrotic explosions, dealing huge damage for the remaining 200,000 HP. There really is no good way to completely avoid all the attacks, so the best thing you can do is reduce the damage a bit. Personally, I surge in, use Debilitate, and then drink a Power Burst of Vitality to reduce the damage initially quite a bit. And then I just run around and use attacks while spam eating to make sure I don't drop too low. As I mentioned before, it's better to use Reflect over Debilitate, as you will also reflect some of the damage back, but personally I prefer not using the runes if I don't have to. So let's have a look at what a kill can look like once you start getting it down a bit more. First you bank, and then you start summoning your necromancy summons. I start with the zombie, then the ghost, and then the skeleton. As soon as I enter, I use the ghost special ability, followed up by the skeleton special ability. The good thing about doing all of these before the combat starts is that they are free to use and you don't spend any adrenaline, which allows you to still start the fight with 100%. Right after using these two summons abilities, I use Split Soul. There might be a more optimal point in the fight to use this, but I like to use it early so I can make sure that I can get it back off cooldown if my kills are going slower for whatever reason. Then I target cycle and use Death Skulls and a Vulnerability Bomb at the same time. At this point I just use some basic abilities to get to 100%, and then I use Living Death alongside my Adrenaline Potion, which then allows me to use Death Skulls really quickly. And at this point in the fight, the idea is to use Death Skulls every time it is off cooldown while Living Death is still going on. This will allow you to use Death Skulls an additional 3 times. Between Death Skulls you're gonna wanna try to use as many Finger of Deaths alongside with the Skeleton's special attack. At this point we enter the last phase of the boss fight. Again, here we're going to do as much damage as possible. Typically I saved my Volley of Souls for this point, and I will also be using Death Skulls as well as the tier 90 weapon special attack to deal as much damage as we possibly can. Again, use Debilitate, Reflect and Vitality Potion if you need to, and run around the room to avoid as much damage as possible. There are slightly better strategies that you can use for more consistency, but this is the strategy I came upon all alone while trying to learn the combat style myself. I will link you to the PvMe, which is one of the most optimal strategies you can use, but if you can, I do recommend you just try the boss and try to improve the kill speeds as you go, as you'll have a lot more fun and you'll be learning the combat style a lot better. Finally, it's time to talk about the loot, so welcome back to all the viewers who skipped right to this point. But anyway, if you've done this boss before, you might have noticed that the common drops really aren't anything too great, with a few exceptions, especially when we compare them to the common drops of some of the recent bosses. Luckily, Rasial's rare items are somewhat common, which does make up for that. I've been keeping track of all the drops I received throughout this grind, so let's break them down. As an Ironman, I like to always start by showcasing how much GP you can get without selling any of the items on the GE. Rasial doesn't have a normal coin drop, but he does have quite a few alkables on his drop table, which added up to 175 million GP once alked, which means that this boss is about 6 million GP an hour purely in alkables. With that said, if I were to sell all of the common loot from 1000 kills on the Grand Exchange, it would have totaled to 255 million GP. But luckily, most of the value from the loot from this boss actually comes from the big rare item drops. We'll talk about more in depth which ones we actually got at the end, but if we add the value from those drops and consider the current prices, which might fluctuate, we got a total of 4 billion GP, which translates to 4 million GP per Rasial kill, or 135 million GP per hour, which slots in as one of the best money making methods in the game. Obviously, keep in mind, as you might be able to see later, we did get lucky, and the prices will likely drop quite a bit, because right now the demand is super high, as literally everyone has been training necromancy, and so the demand for the new items are probably higher than they ever will be. It's awesome that Rasial can be taken out quite reliably even as soon as you unlock him at level 95. And so it's also nice that he does give a nice amount of XP, which really did end up being a significant chunk of my training to 120. Obviously, Rasial doesn't give the best necromancy XP an hour, which does come in around 630,000 XP per hour, but that still is pretty good, and it did add up to a total of 18 million necromancy XP over this entire grind. Rasial also drops mementos, which are used in rituals to gain souls. Sadly, because you need 30,000 souls to do Rasial, and the maximum you need for the last unlock is 35,000 souls, you're not gonna be able to use these that much. But if we ever do get a future update that gives us more rewards for more souls, then these will come in very handy. Some of the other useful supplies include over 500 super necromancy potions, which are extremely useful as they are a new ingredient required to make overloads. And so far, this is pretty much the only source to get them from PvM in the game. We also got a ton of soul runes, a ton of anima stones, which will help us make more runes. We also did get about 1000 rocktails, which is nice, but we used way more than this during this entire grind. Then there are a few more drops that aren't amazing because they are on a ton of other boss drop tables as well, but this is the total loot as you can see it in this inventory. With that said, let's talk about the uniques. Rasial has quite a few unique boss drops. He pretty much drops the entire best in slot necromancy equipment set. And so, as an Iron, trying to get back all the best in slot gears for all styles, it is pretty much required for me to chase this entire boss collection log. So, this is our log. In 1000 Rasial KC, we were able to get 1 Omni Guard, 3 separate soulbound lanterns, which is a huge reason why my GP is as high as it was, 1 Crown of the Necromancer, 2 robe bottoms, 2 gloves, and 2 boots. And luckily, we were also able to snag up Miso, a wonderful little pet, which means that at this point all we need is the top to get the full collection log and best in slot necromancy equipment. The community has estimated the drop rate to be about 1 in 100 for a random drop, with each drop being the same chance of being obtained. So in 1,000 kills you would expect 10 drops. We were able to get 11, which means we are slightly lucky, but if you consider that a lot of our dupes are in the lanterns, that means we were pretty lucky as far as GP value goes. Although we did also get dupes of the worst items. With that being said, of course, our journey isn't over, we need that rope top, and so we will be getting that live on Twitch. I've decided to move all my streaming activity over there, so if you're interested in that at all, go over there and give it a follow. I might be live when this video goes up, but if I'm not, just go ahead and follow and you'll be able to catch the next stream easily. Of course, make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel. We've recently hit 7,000 subscribers, which is honestly amazing. Thank you guys so much for that. We've only been making videos for about 4 months and the support has been monumental. Even still, about 95% of the people watching these videos aren't subscribed yet, so if that is you, consider subscribing so you don't miss out on the next ones. And with that said, I once again want to thank the members for making these videos possible. The members get access to a bunch of small perks, including some smaller extra little videos. Later this week I hope to upload a small behind the scenes video how I made the intro of this video for the members. So make sure to check that out if you're interested.